Hi, this is Steve. I just wanted to give you a heads up that this episode of Shaken contains depictions of violence and abuse. It is not recommended for kids, and listener discretion is advised.
Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Hi, welcome to Shaken. I'm Steve Sunshine. If life has you asking God questions like, where are you? Or why did you let this happen to me? You're in the right place. Shaken is full of honest conversations and stories for real hope, not pat answers. We look at suffering pretty unflinchingly, but we also point you to Jesus, the source of hope and comfort in any circumstance.
But you know, the very first night he went to jail, he was arrested and taken to jail the first night. I was angry. I had all of these big emotions, but that night I prayed for him. I prayed that he wouldn't be scared in jail. I prayed that he would feel the presence of God around him. It was not that I was in love with my ex-husband, but there was a part of, I knew, Lord, I am making a choice to forgive. And I think that has been a part of the healing, because when you are unforgiving, I like to say with my clients in therapy, it's like an umbilical cord between two people. You stay attached to them and it pulls the life source out of you, and only you can cut that cord.
Kimberly Haar has lived a nightmare. She was beaten and kidnapped by her ex-husband and witnessed him shooting the man she was dating. Now Kimberly is sharing her story and helping others through her work as a licensed counselor and her new book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts.
My first husband and I had been married for 23 years. And during that time, there had been repeated infidelities. We had 4 children, so I made the decision to stay in our marriage. I didn't want our children to be going back and forth from home to home. But after we'd been married 23 years, in 2013, I discovered my ex-husband had actually been in an affair. And at that point, I made the decision that even though our youngest children were still in high school, I couldn't stay in the marriage any longer.
Sure.
And so after a lot of thought, a lot of wise counsel, I made the decision to file for divorce. And I told my ex-husband we would stay friends. During the 4 years it took to get our children out of the home into college, I was not going to date anybody. So in my opinion, I thought we had a very friendly divorce.
Yeah.
I had told him that after 4 years, when our children were gone, if he got his act together, if he made some dramatic changes, there was a possibility we could maybe talk about, whether or not there was any chance of reconciliation. But after 4 years, I realized that the changes had just not been made. Okay. So after the 4 years, my ex-husband asked me if we could consider reconciling, and I had begun to date again. I was 50 years old. I decided I was going to put myself out there and date again. At the beginning of 2017, I just felt a stirring in my heart that said this was the year I was going to be married again. And I met a man on April Fool's Day. And we both knew that, within just a few days, we both knew this was going to be the relationship we both wanted to marry. And after the man I dated was an engineer. And it kind of tickled me because it was probably, I don't know, maybe a few dates in, and he asked me, he said he had asked Google how long you needed to know somebody before you knew you were in love, because this was just going faster than either one of us expected. But we both knew. He told me he wanted to marry me, and we both knew this was the trajectory of our relationship.
But being an engineer, he wanted a blueprint.
He wanted a blueprint, yes. Yeah. And I knew when he told me he wanted to marry me, I knew that wasn't a question, so I didn't answer because I didn't want to, put myself out there. But we both knew. And so 4 weeks after I had met him, my ex-husband asked me to come to his home, and he wanted to talk to me about our children. And we had done that many times before. I didn't think anything about it. And when I went there, he began to pressure me about wanting to redate me. And I told him I had met somebody and we were getting serious and he needed to move on. And my ex-husband made a comment. He said, maybe I'm going to need to go talk to that man. Uh-oh. And I thought, oh my goodness, he's going to go make a fool of himself. He's going to spread a rumor about me. And so when I left my ex-husband's home, I called my boyfriend, and I said, can I come talk to you for a minute? And I went over there like at 9 o'clock at night, and I said, this is what was said. This was kind of the disagreement. And I said, would you fight for me? And he said, of course I would. And when I asked him why, he said, because I was worth it. Little did I know that within 24 hours, he was not only going to be fighting for me, he was also going to be fighting for his life. Because that night I went home, I was getting in bed, and something just stirred inside me and said, lock your bedroom door. I was living alone. And so I got up, locked my bedroom door, and at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door crashing down off the hinges. My ex-husband was intoxicated. He had a gun in his hand, and for the next 4 hours, he proceeded to assault me. After that 4 hours, he told me that as punishment for ruining his life, he was going to kidnap me and make me watch him murder the man I had just begun dating. So I got in the vehicle with him. I didn't realize he had been stalking me, so he knew where this man lived. And he did make a comment. He said, I was lucky that I was not at my boyfriend's house at 11 o'clock at night, the night previous, because he had driven by at 9 and he had seen my car there. And he said, if you were there at 11 o'clock, I was going to come in and kill you both. And so we got to this man's house. I watched as my ex-husband took the gun, took some extra bullets. He looked over at me and he said, now you can go do what you need to do. And I watched as he mounted the steps of the front of my boyfriend's house. He shot through the front door. I heard 3 gunshots, but I would later learn he had been shot 10 times. And I made an escape to a local super center. We got 911 called, and I ended up in the emergency room. And long story short, the man that was shot, his family contacted my phone and they said, hey, we appreciate that they've been together, but we just think they should go different ways. And so I couldn't find my boyfriend because he was under an assumed name in the hospital. It was a crime scene, and he underwent surgery after surgery after surgery. And so for the next 4 to 6 weeks, I really had to come to terms with how do I heal after this traumatic event has happened? And what do I do if I never hear from him again?
He survived?
He survived. He was shot 10 times with hollow point bullets. And he was shot in the femoral artery. He was shot in the back. He was shot. It was all through the front door. My ex-husband never actually got entry into his home, but the front door had a lead glass window on it. And so he shot through the lead glass window.
So what happened after that? I mean, were you able to get in touch with him again?
I was not able to get in touch with him. My phone number, I had only met his adult children. I had met one of his adult children. 2 of his children I had never met, so they were all adults. They took my phone number out of his phone. And honestly, I don't really remember why I didn't reach back out to him by phone. I think I didn't know if he was in the hospital. I knew he had lived, but I knew it was pretty serious. So I just kind of gave it some time. And it was 5 weeks later, and I got a Facebook Messenger notice, and it was from him. And it said, hey, I'm alive. And I asked him, I said, can I come? And he was getting ready to go in the hospital for another surgery. And I said, can I come see you? And he said, let me get through this surgery and I'll reach out and contact you after the weekend. But he ended his text or the Facebook Messenger with take care. And I thought, what does take care mean? Does that mean I wish you well with your life? Does it mean I love you? What does take care mean? And so the weekend went by, and when he contacted me after that weekend, and he said he was in the hospital, and he said, come up when my kids aren't here. So here I am, 50 years old. He is now my husband, but he was 53, and we are sneaking around our adult children. And so I went to the hospital, and I looked at him, and I said, Andrew Haar, I said, where does this leave us? And he said, I don't know. He goes, I've seen all of the felony counts. He goes, I know what happened to you, and I know you're going to be messed up. And he goes, I know what happened to me, and I'm going to be messed up. And my heart sank because I knew this is the man I was going to marry. And so I looked at him, shook my finger in his face, and I said, Andrew Haar, you will never meet another woman like me. And 4 weeks later, we were engaged, and 4 months later, we got married, and we've been married 8 years now.
That's awesome. I was hoping that's the way the story was going to go. Now, how did the relationship with his kids develop after that?
You know, I had not met 2 of his children, but honestly, the very first time I met them, it was very awkward. It was, you know, I think that they saw that their dad was happy, and they were very quick to accept me. They were very quick to love me. And between my husband and I, we've got all adult children. Some are married. So when we get together for holidays, we have 11 adult children and 3 grandchildren that come. So we are kind of like the Walton family.
Oh, that's great. So talk about how you recovered from all this, or what were the stages of grief and
Sure.
the things you went through emotionally and spiritually, because this sounds really hard, to say the least.
You know, from the very beginning, and I think this is maybe my therapist background, from the very beginning, as I was sitting in the emergency room, now I had been assaulted for 4 hours, so I was almost unrecognizable. And I later on reconnected with the detective who was working my case, and about a year later, and she said, Kim, do you remember what you said to me in the emergency room that day? She goes, I was training another detective. And I said, no, I don't remember. And she said, you looked at me, bloody face and all, and you said, I will not let this experience go to waste. I will be a better therapist because of it. My daughter asked me, she goes, Mom, do you remember what you said to me in that emergency room? And I said, no, I don't remember. And she goes, you looked at me and you said, promise me you won't let this make you bitter. And so on the day of my assault, I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I knew that I was going to heal.
Yeah.
And that day, I initially went to my parents' house for the first few nights. And obviously, when you've had something very traumatic happen, there was lots of feelings of being numb. There were lots of disbelief. There was lots of anger. There was a lot of anxiety and fear. I couldn't sleep at night. But my aunt and uncle had a home in the same town I was in, and they said they were leaving for Canada for the summer. And they gifted me their home for the summer. And they said, we don't want you to have to go back to the house that all this happened in. And as they were giving me a tour of their house, I went to the backyard, and there was a beautiful big pergola in the backyard. It had 2, big swings on it. It had a big cement floor. And there was something in me that said, this is the place I was going to begin my healing. And so in the beginning days, I'd wrap myself in a big green blanket, and I would lay down on that cement floor prostrate, and I would just weep and weep, and hours I would weep. And I remember praying and telling the Lord, I don't have any words. I am so empty. And I said, I don't have words to even pray. And I asked the Lord, there was a scripture I knew in Zephaniah that says that the Lord sings over us. And I asked the Lord, I said, I'm asking you to just sing your healing over me because I don't have anything in me. And I would begin to listen to praise and worship music. And in the beginning, I couldn't even sing along with them. I let them be a prayer of declaration over me. And so I would lay there and I would cry and I would weep and I would journal. I would listen to music. Little by little, I would begin to incorporate, family and really trusted friends that would come by. I got to the point where I had to really surrender my will to the Lord because I had my idea of how this was supposed to turn out. I called all my friends. I said, okay, get me on every prayer chain. This is how I want you to pray. I want everybody to pray that Andrew will have a Kim-shaped hole in his heart and he's going to come back. And I was saying, this is how you pray, when you pray, who you pray to. And I was really trying to control it. And then I was saying, but Lord, I trust you. Yeah. And I got to the point where I had to say, Lord, I'm scared to trust you because what if what I get isn't what I want? And it was a period of time where I would literally get up, and what I did is at the pergola, I put myself, there was a song that came on the radio called Dance With Me, O Lover of My Soul. And the Bible talks about a sacrifice of praise. And I like to say a sacrifice of praise is lifting your hands when your heart is heavy. And I told the Lord, I am going to, as a sign of my trust and as a sign that I will trust. I don't feel trust. I'm scared to trust. I would put myself in a waltz position, and I would close my eyes, and I would imagine myself being held in the arms of Jesus. And I would kind of like do this waltz around the pergola to this one song. And I would always end it, and I would bow my head, and I would say, Lord, I choose to trust you. And little by little, my healing began. I had to walk through a lot of forgiveness. And when I say walk through forgiveness, it took longer than 6 weeks for forgiveness. But I began the choice of I was going to forgive. And I had to forgive myself because I felt like I had failed. I felt like I failed my children when I got divorced because I felt like now they were from a broken home. I felt like I failed the Lord because I had made promises in my vows for better or worse. And I know God doesn't want us in situations like that. So I'm not saying God was holding me to that, but I felt like I had let him down. I felt like I failed as a marriage and family therapist because here I work with people telling them how to work on their relationships and mine's falling apart. And so I really had to work through forgiveness and make choices on a daily basis. That healing, it didn't come quickly, but it came a little bit at a time.
A couple of things that come to mind when you talk about that guilt that you felt. I was sort of imagining this just happened and you were sharing it with me. I thought when in that marriage with that person, with the troubles that he had, the kids would not have been better off. And
correct.
If a client or somebody had come to you and they were in that situation, you wouldn't say, by all means, stay in the marriage.
That's
but we're
right.
harder on ourselves sometimes than we are on other people.
We absolutely are. And in things, when trauma hits you, trauma has a way of really hitting your self-esteem and your self-worth. And it is very common in trauma to be able to ask yourself, what did I do to cause this? Was this my fault? And that's one of the reasons that it is so important it's important to align ourselves with the Word of God and what God says, because if we don't do that, we partner with the lies that the enemy tries to tell us. We partner with shame. We take that on. When I got divorced in 2013, I remember it felt like a blanket of shame wrapped itself around me. And I carried the letter D on me. It was divorced, defective, disqualified, discarded, damaged. And I had to work through and recognize the shame that was trying to tell me who I was and even work through that process. So this was a process that had begun years earlier.
Yeah, that's really pretty remarkable. And it's do you think that you were able to move through this partly because of your training, or is this really all God, or how do you look at that,
Sure.
the process?
I would say it was both. Because, I pulled on my training when my ex-husband broke into my bedroom. I think that there was a lot of my training that I had been through from, 18 years of training. So I was very good about not getting into like a panic mode. It was like I was coaching myself through that, really saying, okay, because one of the first things my ex-husband actually told me is he said he'd come from killing my mom and dad. And now he had not, but I didn't know that. And in that moment, I remember telling myself, put that in a container, put that on the shelf. You can grieve that later because there's nothing you can do. So there was a gift of calm that I walked through. I never panicked. I was very mindful about what my actions were. And I think I made some really good decisions that really kept me alive. But there was also that part of me that, when I was assaulted, lots of times people will ask, where is God when bad things happen? And there was a period where I was laying on my bed. I was scared. I was cold. I was, didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know if I was going to die. But all of a sudden, I sensed a presence in the room. And it was a sad presence. I could just feel the sad presence. But it was like this presence was holding my hand. And I thought of Psalm 23 that says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you're with me." And I knew in that moment all fear left me, because I knew if I did die, I would not have died alone. And as a parent, I use an example with when I have 4 children, but when my middle daughter was getting her immunizations for kindergarten, I went with her to get her immunizations. And I remember she looked at me with fear in her eyes. I couldn't do it for her, but I told her, I said, "Look into my eyes. I'm not going anywhere. Mommy is right here. Hold my hand." And it was that same kind of a parental feeling of, it was like the Lord was saying, "I am right here. I am not going anywhere. Hold my hand." And so when bad things happen, I don't believe God causes those bad things to happen, but he never takes his presence away from us. And he does redeem and he does restore.
Yeah. It's not always a solving of the problem in the sense that we think of, and sometimes the healing doesn't come until the next life.
That's right.
But his presence is, we've had so many guests on this show say that his presence is everything. You know that you're not alone. You know that, we have a God who has been through suffering himself, and some pretty horrible suffering, and he knows what that feels like. It's a kind of a amazing gift of empathy that you wouldn't. I think if you were making up a religion, you wouldn't come up with that.
That's right. One of the things is that even though when I wrote my book, it is my story, but it's somewhat of a love story, but the love story isn't with me and my husband. The real love story is that Jesus was there. And it was just the sweet, gentle, loving presence of the Lord that walks us through the toughest valleys of our life.
When somebody comes in, let's say, or maybe there's somebody listening right now who is on the very raw side of some kind of trauma, what's the first thing you would say to them?
I think that one of the first things now, if they came in to see me as a counselor, it would be, okay, we're going to walk through this slowly. And the steps, it's like in the beginning, healing steps. It may be just getting out in the sunshine. It may be, healing is so slow. It's allowing yourself to have all of your emotions. It's allowing yourself to have grief. It's allowing yourself, not trying to just push things to the side and pretend you're okay and wear a mask. It's really about giving yourself and honoring the experience you've gone through and taking that slow but not staying stuck. It's that decision of, I don't know what healing's going to look like, but it's those baby steps every single day that are going to bring you healing. I think that if it was somebody that wasn't coming to see me as a therapist, that was just a friend, I would say the first thing you need to do is get a good counselor, get a good, it may be a pastoral counselor, it may be I always prefer a licensed counselor in something like this because we're trained in trauma. But it's somebody that is a safe place that is going to help you as you're healing, because I think that is so important. Too many people will say things like, well, aren't you over this by now? Or, well, at least you should be happy this didn't happen. Or look what you have to be grateful for. And There are just very unwise things that are said, and it's out of ignorance. People don't know. But so I would say get a good counselor that can walk that journey with you, and you're going to heal at your pace.
What do we do wrong when friends come to us and say, this horrible thing has happened? What do we do wrong? What can we do right?
Sure. I think what we do wrong is we try to fix it. We try to put a bow on it. We try to find out details. I think that sometimes we are part of the problem in that we just want to cheer somebody up, and that's not what somebody needs. One of the most wonderful things and the gifts that I got sometimes were friends that came over and we didn't even talk. We were just in the same room, and they gave me the gift of silence. And it was just them saying, hey, you're going through this scary thing, but we just want you to know we're here beside you. And so not trying to fix it is really one of the best things people can do. And just knowing whether it is a text message or a call or dropping off a meal and not staying to talk and just saying, we're here and we want you to know we're praying for you.
Yeah. I thought of Job's friends, which it's a master class in what not to do. But they did start by listening, which I think is interesting. So then after that, I don't think they knew what they were doing.
I think many times people, when you've gone through something like, something that is earth-shattering, and let me just say that, trauma, there's many different kinds of trauma. Sometimes people will downplay what they've gone through because it's not something like what I did with a kidnapping and assault, but pain is pain. And trauma does not have to be dramatic. It is just something that has impacted you and that has changed the view of yourself, the world, others. And so it's not about whose trauma is the worst. And being able to just listen in the beginning, lots of times people that have gone through hard things don't want to talk about it. They just need a safe place because there is an unpacking, there is a grieving. Like when I say I wept for days, I didn't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. It was like my body needed to release that pain, and I needed to be able to release some of that before I was ever able to talk about it.
Would it have been helpful for somebody to sit with you silently, or would you have rather been alone in that kind of a context?
Both. Okay. I found a journal I wrote during that time, and I was off work during this time, obviously, and my bosses were talking to me about what I needed to come back to work. And so I wrote down, what is it that I need? And I put, I need to be alone. And then I put, I need to have a friend to come and sit with me. I need to, it was like I found myself when I was in public, or even if I was with some friends, when I was with them, I just couldn't wait to get back home and be alone. But when I was alone, I desired so much somebody to be there with me. So there's such a conundrum of feelings that you go through that I think it changes from moment to moment.
Yeah. Wow. So your book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts, Reclaiming Your Life After Grief, Loss, or Trauma, what's the takeaway? I mean, I know there's lots of things, but what are you most hoping that anyone who reads that book is going to take away from it?
Sure. I think that more than anything, I want people to realize that healing is possible. Even after the worst events that have happened, is that healing is possible. They are not too far broken. They are not too far that things are like, well, I can't heal. This is the worst thing. And I really hope people will take away that we all have a choice. I use an example in the book about when I went to the district attorney's office because it was a crime scene. There was a piece of paper I always had to sign in on, and it said, "Victim, sign here." And I remember thinking I was a victim in a moment, but I didn't want that to be my label. I was victimized, and I was going to heal. And so my book is really about, what name are we going to call ourselves? Are we going to stay in that place of pain and be angry, unforgiving, broken, or are we going to actually do the healing work and say, you know what, we can be joyful again, we can be healed, we can be forgiving, we can be set free. So it's really about taking people so that they don't get stuck in pain.
Have you talked with your ex-husband since all of this?
I have not. I will tell you that the very last words that I spoke to my ex-husband, it was the day I was assaulted. After the intoxication was wearing off, he looked down into my bloodied face and he said, "Tell me the truth, you could never forgive me." And the last words I ever spoke to my ex-husband is I looked up into his face and I said, "You've gone too far." I said, "But I want you to know I will forgive you." And those were the last words I spoke to him.
Wow. And do you feel that you have forgiven him?
I absolutely have forgiven him. Now, it doesn't mean, because with forgiveness, it's not a once and done. It is when I am reminded of something or there is a painful memory, it is I get to remind myself I made a choice and I made a decision, because it's not a feeling. And I get to remind myself, you know what? I've chosen to forgive, and I'm going to forgive again. And I'm going to forgive again. And I'm going to forgive again. And it's like a layer of onion. It gets easier and easier. But the very first night he went to jail, he was arrested and taken to jail the first night. I was angry. I had all of these big emotions. But that night I prayed for him. I prayed that he wouldn't be scared in jail. I prayed that he would feel the presence of God around him. It was not that I was in love with my ex-husband, but there was a part of, I knew, Lord, I am making a choice to forgive. And I think that has been a part of the healing. Because when you are unforgiving, I like to say with my clients in therapy, it's like an umbilical cord between two people. You stay attached to them, and it pulls the life source out of you, and only you can cut that cord.
Yeah, no, that's very powerful. Healing from life's deepest hurts, reclaiming your life after grief, loss, or trauma. Looks like, I think this is right, it releases on June 3rd.
It does.
And if everything goes the way I think it will, this podcast you're hearing it if you're listening on the first day, just a few days before that. I know Amazon, where are good places to go to get it?
Sure. You can get it anywhere books are sold. You can go to my website, KimberlyHaar.com, and that's Kimberly, and then my last name is spelled Haar, KimberlyHaar.com. I've got a link to all the retailers. You can go to Amazon, you can go to Barnes & Noble, to Target, to Baker Books, my publisher, so you can go anywhere books are sold.
I have to do this because I'm a nerd. Haar is Dutch, right?
I think it is. My husband's heritage, he is actually, his father and grandfather, they were actually Jewish.
Okay.
But I think it is a Dutch name.
Well, I know the Dutch love double vowels, and that we have something in common, too, because my grandfather was Jewish. He eventually converted, but his family, the Sunshine branch, that name comes from a Jewish heritage as well, so...
Well, I have on my side, there is some Dutch and German. My maiden name was actually Enns, E-N-N-S, and it was 2 consonants. So there's nothing about easy last names.
That's right. That's great. Are you on social media?
I am. I can be found on Instagram and on Facebook. On Facebook, it is Kimberly J. Haar, but it pulls up as Kimberly Haar Author. And on Instagram, it's Kimberly.Haar.
And KimberlyHaar.com is your website.
That is my website. I've got a lot of good resources on there. I love to bless people with tools that are going to be healing.
Awesome. Kimberly, thank you for taking the time with us today. And we pray that this book, I think it will, help a lot of people through some very hard times.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Shaken. If you know someone who's asking questions like, why did God allow this to happen? Is God angry at me? What do I make of my suffering? Would you please share Shaken with them? You can help more people find Shaken by liking and subscribing and reviewing this podcast. You can find more episodes at purposely.com or wherever you get podcasts.
Thanks for listening. We just wanted to take a minute to let you know that just like you and your family, Purposely is also part of a family, the Krista Family of Ministries. Krista helps kids and teens learn and grow in their faith at King Schools and Miracle Ranch Camp. And Krista shares Jesus with people in the poorest, most remote places through World Concern. Krista Senior Living is a community of love and care, and Krista Media is a place of hope on the radio. God is changing lives through these 5 ministries, and Krista is on mission to share the good news of Jesus. To learn more, visit Krista.org.